All right, so we've moved our way back to Darrell Avenue, or if you know the magic of editing, we're still kind of where we were when we started the episode. So what we're going to do is we're going to head from Darrell Avenue here down City Road and basically run parallel to the railway line here. We'll chase this series of locomotives here. So while we're doing this, we're going to do our usual history lesson. So this line was constructed by Grand Trunk Pacific Railway. Its parent company, the Grand Trunk Railway, was one of the oldest railway companies in Canada, dating back to 1852. This was going to be an attempt by Grand Trunk to construct a second transcontinental railway across Canada. And now the problem was Grand Trunk didn't really want to, they weren't really keen on sort of building this rail line kind of all on their own, because it was a huge endeavor. And so after it seemed like forever, but it was a lot of years of kind of going back and forth, they finally formed a partnership with the Canadian government. And so the plan was that Grand Trunk would build the western half of a transcontinental railway, basically everything from Winnipeg to the west to Prince Rupert on the coast of the Pacific Ocean, under the name Grand Trunk Pacific. And then the government would build everything Winnipeg east to New Brunswick under the name National Transcontinental. Now, this line was a bit of an anomaly because it connected to the NTR, because it connected to the east of Winnipeg, but it was a Grand Trunk Pacific line. And again, the whole purpose of building this line was to basically give the system, the Grand Trunk NTR system, access to Lake Superior. And so construction started in 1905 and was completed by 1908. Now, shortly after construction was completed, there was a problem that popped up. Basically, there was an issue with Grand Trunk taking over operational control of the NTR system. And what ended up happening was the Canadian government was forced to do that. And so they ended up creating a railway company to do that. They created the Canadian Government Railways. Now, again, remember that this is a Grand Trunk line. So what ended up happening, and because it connected to the NTR, you know, effectively operational control was in the hands of the Canadian Government Railways. So they leased this line from Grand Trunk Pacific. And so originally this line had been known as the Grand Trunk Pacific Lake Superior Division, or Lake Superior branch, and it became the Grand Trunk Pacific, it became the Canadian Government Railways Fort William and Wraith subdivisions. And during that time, so there was about 4 years that the Canadian Government Railways had control of this line. There was a huge series of upgrades and things like that were done. And in late 1918, the Canadian Government Railways were merged, amalgamated into a new railway line along with Canadian Northern to form Canadian National Railways. Okay, I'm gonna pause here for my story here because it's getting really loud. There's lots of traffic. We're coming up to a level crossing, so I'm gonna come to the level crossing and then I'm gonna continue my story. You can get a good shot here of these couple CN locomotives in the old Duluth, Missabe and Iron Range, number 403. All right. So this is basically a private crossing here, okay? And so I'll finish my story and then I'll talk a little bit about sort of what's going on here. You see there's grain all kind of spilt on here. And so in 1919, when Canadian National Railways came into effect, the name of this line changed. Again, it had been part of the Canadian Government Railways, and then so the name changed. It became the Canadian National Railways Fort William and Wraith subdivision. And then a couple of years later, so a few months later, the name changed once again. So by October of 1919, the line became the Canadian National Railways Lake Superior subdivision. Now, at the time this was all sort of going down, CN began looking at consolidating a lot of their lines in the area, because basically CN had taken over two railway systems. You had the old Grand Trunk system and you had the old Canadian Northern system. And so they began looking at, well, what can we rationalize? What can we consolidate? And so they basically began a program of looking at that, and eventually they started work on it. So in 1923, the name of this line changed. It became the Graham Subdivision, and which most people know it as. And around that time, they began this process of trying to consolidate the lines. And so what happened is they began construction on a double track heading west out of what is now Thunder Bay, out of the Needing Yard, and then basically working their way all the way up to a former station that used to be known as Rowan, that would eventually become Conmee Junction. There they built a bridge across the Matawan River, and then linking up with the Grand Trunk Pacific line there. And so everything to the east on the old Grand Trunk Pacific line would be abandoned. And so in 1924, the line was split again into the Crest and the Graham subdivisions in preparation for abandoning the Crest subdivision. And then in 1925, the line was split again. It was split now into three: the Crest, the Wraith, and the Quorn subdivisions. And in the spring of 1925, the Crest subdivision was abandoned. And so the line continued as the Wraith and Quorn subdivisions up until 1931, when it reverted back to the Graham subdivision. And the line continued to operate until 1994, when it was abandoned by CN. Now, there are parts of the old Grand Trunk line, the Grand Trunk Pacific line, that are still being used. This is one of them here, right? So essentially you can see here the line that runs in this area. Again, as we mentioned, this is part of a still active rail line. So this is part of the Kashabowie subdivision, which runs from Thunder Bay to Atikokan and eventually on to Winnipeg. And this is called the Mission Spur. And the reason why it's called the Mission Spur is basically because it ran down to what is Fort William. So Fort William First Nation is just right across the street from us here. And so the indigenous village that was there used to be called the Mission. And so here you can see the line. You can actually see here the remnants of a part of an old Y. And so you can see it kind of starts in over there, and that comes across here and basically runs off over in this direction here. And so again, there was a lot more kind of lines running through this area in the past. And obviously over time, a lot of those lines have been pulled up. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you. I'll show you a map, and you can basically see some of the lines in the area. All right, let's head back down to City Road here and try to follow the grade a little bit more here. So it's a beautiful June morning, or almost out of morning. It's 11:30. I had to wait to get started with this hike a little bit because otherwise in some spots you'd be shooting right into the rising sun, because we're looking east now. The only problem with that is the traffic has increased considerably on the road here. So basically this is kind of the main access road coming in here to Fort William First Nation. So there's another little road that we can get in here to see the rail line. Here it is. So we're just slightly to the west of where we were before, and so you can see the other side of that Y that we were taking a look at right here with the junction. Now there was a junction a little bit further up, and we're going to talk a little bit about that very shortly. All right, so we're back on City Road here. We kind of pull away from the railway grade a little bit. Hopefully I don't get run over here. There's lots of traffic. Early this morning it was much quieter. Okay, so let's pull off here on the shoulder. So I mentioned a few moments ago that there was another junction. So somewhere in this area here, and now it's June and it's a little bit harder to see, basically because everything is kind of grown up. But somewhere in here, there was a piece of rail line. Now this I believe was built after the Grand Trunk days, because it doesn't show up on 1913 map, but there was a piece of line that split off and came through here and ran towards the mountain. So that's Mount McKay, which is the most prominent mountain in the area. Let the traffic pass here, which is part of the Nor'Wester Mountains. And the line kind of curved through here, and then I believe there was a brick plant over there, and so I'll show you that map. Now there also was a map, and I'll show you that as well. There was a map that I found, and it says 1910. But then it's got everything that's written on there. It says Canadian National, so obviously it's after 1919, and it shows a roundhouse over here, and that doesn't quite make sense because we know that the roundhouse was over there, right? And we went and sort of took a look at the remains of that, and so that doesn't quite make sense. So here we have another level crossing, another private crossing here, just before the entrance to Coastal Steel. And so again, here you can see the line running to the east towards the yard, and this is curving back up towards where it links up with the Kashabowie subdivision. All right, so let's leave this behind. And the end of our little exploration for today is ending just up there, because this now hooks in with a previous hike that we did. And it's one of the issues with this line, because essentially there were three terminal spots for this line. There was the Mission Terminal, which we're taking a look at on this hike. There was the West Fort Station, which this hike is going to tie into, and then there was yet another station that became sort of the main Grand Trunk station in the area, which became known as the Union Station. It was used up until the CN days, and so this hike now is going to tie into our exploration that we did of the bridge that you can see up ahead. So this is known as the Swing Bridge. Basically because it is a swinging bridge. It pivots on a center pedestal and opens up, even though it hasn't opened up in a very, very long period of time. So in any case, this is the end of this section. So just up ahead, this rail line, which is the Mission Spur, eventually hooks back into the main subdivision, which is the Kashabowie subdivision. So anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed today's exploration and some of the neat things that we've had a look at. So again, make sure you check out the episode where we have a look at the bridge, and that's going to tie in with the rest of the line working its way to the north and then eventually out to the west. So in any case, we're going to be back with yet more exploration. So in the meantime, thanks for tuning in, and stay safe.